our presentations so that we can archive them on our website. And so if anyone wants to view the presentation later, or if there's someone who missed the presentation, all of our webinars are archived on our website. I'm going to go ahead and start our slideshow. And as I'm going through the slideshow, please feel free to stop me. I can't see the chat while I have the slideshow up. So if you have questions, feel free to unmute yourself and ask questions. Or if you want to put something in the chat, I'll stop every once in a while and see if I can check the chat so I can see if there's any questions. So at this point in the year, we're halfway through the first semester, and congratulations, all of you survived teaching the day after Halloween, so thumbs up for that. At this point in the year, we do have a couple of new data sources that we want to take a look at, and we also have some updates to our previous analysis from the beginning of the year. This is our data analysis throughout the year calendar. This is posted on our assessment, research, and program evaluation website. This calendar shows what data sources you have available to you at different points during the year. And each of these is linked to a guide, which helps administrators and campus leaders to walk their staff through the analysis of these different data points. Here at mid-first semester, we're going to be focusing on COGAT. We're going to spend a little time on COGAT since that is a new piece. We'll also talk about the district assessments today, and then a little bit about MAP data as well. So if we look at our comprehensive student analysis framework for the district, we see that we begin with the TEKS, the grade level standards, which feed into the Plano ISD curriculum, along with the English language proficiency standards. We have STAR and TELPAS, which measures how well our students are doing in meeting those state standards. MAP tells us what our students are ready to learn next, whereas those district assessments are a measure of mastery and show what our students are able to master, the TEKS that they're mastering. In those district assessments, we also include formative and summative assessments and reading records as well, which we'll touch on a little bit today. We're going to spend a big chunk today talking about COGAT because COGAT is a different piece of the puzzle and tells us something that none of the other assessment points tell us. It tells us how students learn best. All of these different data sources come together to help us make instructional decisions in the classroom. And the point of this slide is always to remind you that no matter what we're talking about, whether it's MAP or STAR or COGAT, we always want to use all of the data that we have available to make quality instructional decisions about students. So here are our data sources we're going to dig into today. We're going to talk about COGAT, which includes the ability performance chart in EdgeGence. We'll talk about district assessments, whether that's unit assessments in elementary or the progress monitoring assessments in secondary. We'll touch on the reading record reports that are in the campus data folder and then class by writ for MAP as well. So let's talk a little bit about COGAT. COGAT is a cognitive abilities test. It measures a student's cognitive ability, not their achievement. And so the way that COGAT gets to that cognitive ability is by asking questions in a novel or unfamiliar way. COGAT is trying to figure out not how well students can answer questions that they've been taught how to answer, but how well can students reason out a problem that they've never seen before. So that's why it's important that they're being asked to do things in a novel and unfamiliar way, as we're trying to get past achievement to that underlying cognitive ability. A student's cognitive ability is different from their IQ. We do expect cognitive ability to grow and change over time. That's one of the reasons why we give COGAT in our district every other year, is because we do expect to see changes in that. There's three purposes for COGAT. First of all, to have a good measure of a student's cognitive ability. And one of the ways that we use that in our district is one of the identifiers for our gifted and talented program. We also use COGAT to adjust instruction to figure out how students learn best. And then the purpose that I think is most interesting is to be able to find those students, identify those students whose observed levels of achievement in the classroom are markedly discrepant from what we see in their ability. When we see a difference between achievement and ability, that tells us something important about a student, and we want to dig into that a little bit further. Now, grades 1, 3, 4, 5, and 7 have recently taken COGAT, and those most recent COGAT results will be in EdGens probably within the next week, week and a half. But we're going to go ahead and we're going to look a little bit about how to understand those COGAT results, because I feel like COGAT is probably one of the most underused assessments that we have in our district. COGAT does provide us with a couple of different kinds of results, kinds of scores. One of them is a standard age score, but the other is a profile. And a COGAT profile tells you a lot about a student. It has two parts. The first part shows the student's overall ability to reason, their cognitive ability. And that's going to be a number from 1 to 9. The second half of the COGAT profile tells you how the three batteries of COGAT, the verbal, nonverbal, and quantitative, how they relate to each other. And that relationship really tells us how kids learn best. And that can be very helpful for us instructionally. So if we look at the first part of that COGAT profile, if you take the bell curve that most standardized assessments are broken down into, and you take that bell curve and divide it into 9 equal pieces, those are called stay-nines. COGAT uses this stay-nine construction so that they can talk about where a student sits on the bell curve without getting bogged down in little differences between scores. So if you look at this stay-nine distribution, you'll see this a student who has a 1 at the beginning of their COGAT profile, they're in stay-nine 1, that student has a very low cognitive ability. And then a student who's a 2 through 3 is a below average. So although all of these students, 1, 2, and 3, are below an average COGAT score, that's not an automatic special ed referral. Remember that COGAT is measuring their learned reasoning abilities, which tend to grow and change over time. We do see kids, particularly English language learners, who come in with a lower cognitive ability, but as their language grows, their overall cognitive ability improves as well. So remember that where a student is sitting and their overall cognitive ability is not a permanent designation. 4 through 6 is the average range, and most students, 2/3 of the general population, are in this average range. Stay-nine 7 and 8 are considered to be above average, and then 9 is very high. I also want you to look at the bottom of this bell curve where it says SAS, that's for standard age score, and notice that right in the center of that is 100. So the average standard age score in COGAT is 100. So when you're looking at those 2 or 3 digit COGAT scores that you get back from your students, keep that in mind, that 100 average, because you'll be comparing where that student sits in relationship to 100. So the first part of that profile is the stay-nine, 1 through 9. The second part is the pattern. COGAT defines 4 possible patterns, and these patterns tell you how the verbal, nonverbal, and quantitative scores relate to each other. A pattern A is when all scores are roughly at the same level. So that student doesn't have any one particular score that's a strength for them. That means that that student will learn equally well no matter how the information is presented to them. On the other hand, a pattern B is when you have one score that's above or below the other two, and it'll always tell you out to the side which is which. If a student has a pattern B, that tells you that they have a relative strength or a relative weakness, which again informs how they learn best. A student who's a pattern C kind of has some extremes. They have a high score and they have a low score, and then the third one is somewhere in the middle. Again, that informs how they learn best. And then finally, COGAT defines a pattern E as an extreme difference. It could be high or low, but that extreme difference is COGAT defines that as 24 points or more of a difference in their individual batteries. And then out to the side of that, it will tell you if it's a V, verbal, strength or weakness, positive or negative, an N, nonverbal, strength or weakness, positive or negative, and a Q, quantitative, strength or weakness, positive or negative. So let's think about what that means as far as instruction. If a student has a verbal strength, if they're a V plus, that means that student learns best through reading, writing, listening, speaking. If a student is a V negative, the opposite of that, then they do not learn best through reading, writing, listening, speaking. It's very common for an English language learner, for example, to be a V negative and they not to learn best through reading, writing, listening, and speaking because the language is still evolving and they're not quite there yet. But as their language improves, that V negative tends to go away. A student who's a nonverbal strength learns best through more hands-on activities, building models, using manipulatives, drawing pictures. And the student who's a quantitative strength, they learn best through rule-based knowledge. They like to know what the rules are. They like to memorize the patterns. These students tend to be really good at math facts. They also tend to be very good at grammar and spelling rules. Quantitative strength kids like to know where the rules are. They like to memorize the formulas so they can apply those in lots of different ways. For a classroom teacher, knowing how a student learns best helps them to be able to figure out what is the best way to present content to a student, particularly if that student seems to be struggling academically. We might just need to approach that instruction in a little bit different way for the needs of that student. Now, where you will see COGAT scores displayed in EduGence, one of the places you'll see that is student assessment history. In student assessment history, you'll see a student's STAR scores, and then right next to that, you see COGAT. In the COGAT column, you see a P for profile, a V for verbal, N nonverbal, Q quantitative, and then C composite. Now, this is the profile score, that part that's in blue. And what's next to that, those are the standard age scores. And remember we said 100 was average. So you look at that 100 average and you compare where the student is sitting to that 100. So if we look at our example here, this student is a 7B with a Q plus. So the 7 tells us the student has an above average cognitive ability. The B tells us they have one score that's above the other two, and in this case, it tells us it's a quantitative strength. So this is the kind of kid who wants to know the formulas, they want to memorize the facts, they want to get some things to automaticity to free up working memory space so that that student can reason at a little bit higher level. This is not necessarily the kind of kid who needs to know why the formula works. They just want to know what the formula is and memorize the formula. But again, knowing that about a student is very helpful. When you are live in EduGence, each of these blue links is clickable, and you can click on that blue link and it takes you out of EduGence to the Riverside Publishing website. Riverside is the publisher of COGAT, and this takes you to a narrative about that particular student based on students that are in the same STAY-9 with the same strengths. This will show you instructional suggestions for a student with that COGAT profile, working memory strategies, grouping strategies, some helpful information for a student that fits that same profile. Parents can access all of the same COGAT information through Parent Portal as well, and they can also click on that link to be able to go to this COGAT profile, this COGAT narrative. No one expects teachers to look at every single COGAT profile for every single kid. This is just another helpful tool in your toolbox for those kids that seem to be underperforming and you're not sure why, those kids that you need to try to find a different way to reach them. So COGAT is very helpful for that purpose. I do want to show you one report that is available to you in EduGence that, again, I feel is very underutilized, and that's the ability performance chart. The ability performance chart compares COGAT scores to MAP scores and COGAT scores to STAR scores. This allows us to do that piece of comparing ability to achievement to see if there's any discrepancies. And knowing that there's a discrepancy helps us to know which kids we need to dig a little bit more deeply into. The way that you access the ability performance chart in EduGence is you click on reports, and then you're going to scroll down to where it says Plano assessments, and under combined assessment, you're going to click on ability performance chart. So this is what the ability performance chart looks like. It's a scatter plot. And you will see on the vertical axis down here, we have map. In this case, I'm looking at reading. So I've got map reading, and then I have map star on this vertical axis. Up at the top is where I could change to different subjects. So if I look at this bottom graph, map reading here is being compared to COGAT verbal scores. And you see the ranges for COGAT right here with that 100 as average. You can kind of picture that bell curve just sort of overlaid right there over the top. Now, each one of these dots represents a student, and that dot is placed where their COGAT score and their MAP score intersect each other. What we expect to see here is we expect that a student with a lower COGAT score would have a lower MAP score, and we expect that a student with a higher COGAT score would have a higher MAP score. That shows that ability and achievement are matching each other. The way that we would see that visually is we see a diagonal of dots from bottom down here to the top up here. Where you see dots that are falling out of that pattern, either they're a little bit high for the other dots around them, or maybe even a little bit low for the other dots around them. Those are telling you that that's a student who has a difference between ability and achievement. There could be really good reasons why they have a difference, but we just need to make sure we know why that student has a difference between ability and achievement. Just as an aside, these different colored dots, if a student's dot is a different color, that just means that that particular student took their test in a different season. So maybe their COGAT was a different year than everyone else's. You can do the same thing for STAR. You can compare STAR to COGAT as well and see if a student has a difference between their ability and their achievement there. All right, I'm going to stop for just a second. Are there any questions? Does anyone have a question so far about that piece with COGAT?
Jennifer, are we still able to hover over the dots and see who the child is?
Yes, when you hover your mouse over the dot, it'll show you the student name, it'll show you their MAP score, their STAR score, and their COGAT. Yep. Okay. All right. Okay, I'm going to go on to our next piece we're going to talk about today, and those are the district assessments. So the district assessments, like I said, this could be the elementary unit test. This could be the middle school and high school progress monitoring assessments. But either way, these are the district assessments that students are taking through EdUgence. We do have lots of resources on our website to help teachers if they're having difficulty with these assessments, with administering them or seeing the results. On our assessment website, we have a whole section dedicated to EdUgence. And on that EdUgence page, we have a guide, we have videos, we have webinar recordings, all about how to administer the assessments, how students take the assessments, some troubleshooting tips, and then how to see the data on the back end and how to look at those reports. So speaking of reports, here are some best practices for those district assessments. One of the best practices is to look at the data. The reason why, as a district, we are moving to having students take these assessments online is it's not for the district, it's not for the admin building. This is for teachers. The purpose of this is so that teachers can get immediate reports that tell them lots of critical information about the results of that assessment. There's two different ways that teachers should be looking at that data. They should look at the assessment data by student and by item. Looking at the assessment by student helps them to know which students need some intervention or enrichment, helps them to make a plan for reteaching, helps them to see what kinds of mistakes students are making. Keep in mind that not all wrong answers are the same, and knowing which wrong answer students pick helps with the reteaching piece. We also want to evaluate the results of an assessment by item. That helps teachers to evaluate how students have responded to your instruction. This is critical feedback for the teacher to improve their instructional practice. That's number 5 on the PLC process, and it's one of those pieces we don't get to very often, but it is important to be able to improve that instructional practice and have data for feedback for that purpose. Now, just like everything else in EdgeSense, there's 900 reports about these district assessments when you don't need that many. There's only a couple that you need. In fact, we only recommend 2. The rest of them you're welcome to use, but there's only 2 reports that we really feel like teachers need to have. Both of these 2 reports are available on what is known as the teacher dashboard. However, the way you get to the teacher dashboard depends on your level of access to EdgeSense. If you are a classroom teacher and you only have access to your students in EdgeSense, then over on the left sidebar, you're going to click where it says district assessments. If you are an administrator, a counselor, a specialist, a team leader, a department chair, and you have full campus access, you can see all of the kids and all of the grades, then you will click on reports and then go to teacher dashboard. Either way, you'll be accessing the teacher dashboard with all of these different reports at the top of the page. Again, like I said, there's 900 reports when you only need a few. There's only 2 reports that we feel like you really need in order to find out everything you need to know about an assessment. One of them is the error analysis, and that's what you see here. The error analysis is a kid-by-kid report. It shows all the students over here on the side. It shows how long the student took to take the test. It shows you how many items they got right and their percent correct. Then across, you'll see for every question that was on the test, what item that student picked. If it's highlighted in pink, then that means it was incorrect. You'll notice this is a math example. So question number 5 was a numeric response item. So students actually typed in a number and you get to see exactly what they typed in. So this is really helpful for a lot of different things. First of all, we can look across at an individual student's row and see students who missed a lot of items. For example, this student who has a raw score of 9, they only got 9 items right on this test, and we can see which items they missed. The other thing that's helpful is you can look up and down to see if there's any items that a lot of students in my class missed. So for example, if I look at question 13, a lot of kids missed this particular item. 38% of students in my class got it right. And when I looked to see what wrong answer they picked, I noticed that most kids picked the same wrong answer. They picked A. So the fact that most students chose answer A tells me there's some sort of common misconception that those students had, and that informs my reteach piece. If a question is about rounding with money, and answer choice A was not a rounding error, but a counting money error, I need to know that because it doesn't do me any good to reteach rounding when that wasn't the reason why they picked the wrong answer. Their issue is being able to count the money. So again, not all wrong answers are the same, and knowing which wrong answer was chosen is really important. If you look at the open-ended response item, you can see that, like, for example, this student got 22.3. So that is interesting in how it is related to the correct answer. This student got 22.91. So these are not too far off from the actual correct answer. So this seems to me like it could just be a mathematical error and not a conceptual error. And that, again, is important to know. So already this report gives us a lot of benefits, a lot of different ways we can look at the data. But there's a hidden benefit, a little Easter egg in the error analysis report, and that is this icon. It looks like a bulleted list, and it's next to each student's name. And that is because it is a student-specific report. When you click on that icon that looks like a bulleted list next to each student's name, it takes you to this report. This is called the Student Assessment Details Report. Up at the top, you can choose district assessment in whatever subject you want to see. And you're going to see all of the unit tests that student has taken, one right after the other. But instead of being organized by item, they're organized by TEK. So questions that test the same TEK, for example, in this case 5.3E, will all be grouped together. Now, this is likely an essential standard, 5.3E, because it was tested 3 times on this unit test. And you can see the student struggled with 5.3E every time. Up at the top of the page, you'll see an average of how the student did in each of those standards. And as we continue to take more unit tests throughout the year, these averages at the top will change. So as 5.3E is spiraled back in on future unit assessments, you'll be able to see is that student getting closer to mastery of that essential standard. This is a very important report for tracking student progress towards mastery of our TEKs. This does so much work for the teacher being able to know exactly which TEKs that student is still struggling with. As you all get closer to STAR in the spring, you can go through here for each kiddo and look at those TEKs that are still highlighted in red and know exactly what those kids still need to be reviewing. So this is a really, really helpful report. It may be difficult to see its helpfulness right now when you only have 1 or 2 unit tests, but as you see additional unit tests, this will be very important for teachers to refer to. Now, all of that piece right there was all under error analysis. So that's a lot of benefit in just one report. The only other report we feel like you need is the item analysis. The error analysis is that kid by kid look to see what reteaching needs to happen, what support students may need. Item analysis is the teacher feedback piece. When you look at the item analysis, it's organized by question, and you see what the TEK was that was tested, whether it's a readiness or supporting standard, and then what the correct answer was. This part in yellow is how my class did. This part in purple is how the entire grade level on my campus did. This difference column allows me to compare myself to the rest of my campus to see, is my class doing about the same as the rest of the grade level, or is there a difference in performance? The part that's in purple is how the entire campus did. The part that's in orange is how the district did. This difference column allows me to compare my campus to the district average to see how different are we from that district average. So when you look through this item by item, this is a great piece for a conversation if you have a safe and collaborative team that can have that open conversation that I really struggled with number 10 with 5.3K. How did you all teach that? Because my class really struggled with it. You guys did better than I did. What are some things that you guys did to instruct that particular TEK? This is a great basis for that conversation and a piece of context that our teachers have been missing before. The other thing that's nice is being able to compare your campus to the district average and see, is this an item that was just difficult for our campus, or is this an item that was difficult across the district? That's 2 very different things, and you need to know the difference to know the instructional implications of that. If you look at right before where the item numbers are, you'll see a little icon. It looks like a bar graph. And again, this is another hidden benefit of this report. It's a little Easter egg in this report as well. When you click on that bar graph icon, it takes you to this, which is the actual question that was asked on the test. It shows you what all the answer choices were and which one is the correct answer. Then you'll see below that at the district, campus, and teacher level, what percent of students chose each answer choice. Below that, you see all of the students in the class and which answer choice each student picked. Now, when you know the reason why they made a certain mistake, all the students who picked A instead of B, when you know why they made that mistake, that makes that reteach piece much more effective and much more efficient, rather than just putting all of the students together that missed the question when they may have made different errors and they may need support for different reasons. So this is a really helpful piece as well.
Can you
Absolutely, go ahead.
Can you show us again where that the bar graph icon is?
Yes, so it's on item analysis and it's right before, it's in that very first column, right before the item number.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Yeah, EduGence likes to hide the best part of their reports in little Easter eggs that you don't even know to click on. So yes. So if we look at that whole piece about the district assessments, error analysis and item analysis, we really feel like that tells your teachers everything you need to know. Okay, those two pieces are all they need. There's many other reports, and of course they're welcome to use any of that, but those two, error analysis, item analysis, if you want to streamline the process, that's what they need. Okay. Are there any questions about the district assessments before we move on to reading records? All right, I'm going to go ahead and jump into reading records. You guys stop me if you have any questions. So elementary folks, kindergarten through 5th grade, your teachers completed beginning of year reading records. Sometime, I believe the end of September is when they were due in EduGence. And our department pulls that reading record data out of EduGence to create a summary report for you. That is put in the campus data folder. The campus data folder is only accessible by principals and APs, but principals, APs, you can pull that report out of your campus data folder, send it out to your staff, however you want to disseminate that. This is what the report looks like at the beginning of the year. It is a status report, which means it just shows this is where they're starting at the beginning of year. At middle of the year, we'll also give you a growth report. So at middle of the year, you'll know not only where were they at the beginning and where were they in the middle, but how much growth have they made. So the way that this report is organized is you see all the reading levels from pre-A all the way down to Z on the side. And by the way, there's an English version and a Spanish version, depending on which reading record was administered. Across the top, you'll see all the grade levels. Kindergarten may look blank. That is because kindergarten beginning of year reading records, that was optional. They didn't have to give those at the beginning of the year. So some teachers may have given a reading record to some of their strong readers at the beginning of kindergarten, but you may not see anything there, and that's perfectly fine. Where you see the white boxes on this report, the white box is considered to be on level. So 1st grade, beginning of the year, level D is on level. 2nd grade, I is on level. That's where I is, right there is on level. So anything that's in this peach section, those are students who are below grade level for that particular grade, and green is above. So when we get to middle of the year, these white boxes will move. So they will move up a couple of levels depending on what grade we're talking about. And so the expectation will go up a little bit as well. So when you're looking at these reading record reports, these are the kinds of conversations that you want to be having about this particular report. Obviously, you want to be looking at your kids who are below level in each of the different grade levels. And you also want to be thinking about that in terms of where are these kids in different classrooms? Are they all mostly in one classroom? Do we have a big chunk of below grade level kids in one classroom, or are they kind of spread out all over? And what implications does that give us as far as flexible grouping for guided reading to be more efficient in that process so that we don't have a teacher who has 7 different guided reading groups that she has to get to? Since at middle of the year, that on grade level band is going to move up, your kids who are right now in that peach, who are right now below grade level, they have to grow even more than an on level kid in order to keep up with the rising expectation. So for example, 1st grade has to grow 6 levels in a year. In order to stay on grade level, they have to move from a D up 6 levels. They have to move more than anyone else does because 1st grade is the big year for reading. So if you have a student who's below on level in 1st grade, they have to move more than 6 levels. If you think about that in terms of where we need to be in the winter, they need to have already moved 3 levels. So at this point, early November, those students that are below grade level should already have moved at least a couple of levels in guided reading in order to be making progress and accelerating to catch up. This is a good time for teachers, whether they're doing an additional reading record or not, to be thinking about their guided reading groups, thinking about those kids who are below level to see if they have moved. And if they haven't moved, then there should be conversations on the team about why. What's happening with the student? What else could we try? And how can we get these students to move up levels? We don't want to wait until winter to find out a student has not moved reading levels, especially in the early grades where kids have to move lots of reading levels in a year. Waiting until winter to find out they haven't moved is too late. So we need to be having those conversations now and considering what adjustments need to be made to our guided reading groups. All right, so I'm going to talk. Yes, go ahead.
Ask you a quick question.
Yes.
Okay. In regards, you mentioned grade 1, of course, moves the most. We hope to see at least 6 levels of growth more if they're behind so they can catch up. What are the, or tell me where to find it. Where would I find, what are the expectations for 2, 3, 4, 5, and kinder when we start at the middle of the year?
So all those expectations are on the curriculum planner.
Okay.
So when you go on the curriculum planner and look up any grade level, it'll be under progress monitoring.
Okay.
And so there's a report, I think it's just called reading record levels, but you'll be able to see a graph of where each grade level should be and how much they should grow over a year.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions you guys have? All right. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to jump into class by writ. So yes, we gave MAP at the beginning of the year and we're going to give it again in the middle of the year. So we're kind of in the middle of our 2 MAP test events, but that doesn't mean that our MAP beginning of year data is still not helpful. We don't have to administer MAP again to know where to go next with instruction because MAP is built on that whole idea of a learning continuum. Because it's a continuum, no matter where they are on it, we know what comes next. So the class by writ report in EduGence shows you wherever the student is at the beginning of the year and allows you to navigate up to know where they need to go next for their instruction. So to access that class by writ report, you can click on reports and then under Plano assessments, you'll see class by writ. It's over here in the purple box. And so this is what that report looks like. And again, this will be beginning of year data, but that's perfectly fine. This will give you an idea of where they started, and then we'll navigate up in a moment. But the first thing to think about is where a student is as far as strengths and weaknesses go. In this case, we've got a student who's got a relative weakness in numerical representations. He's a little bit stronger in computations and geometry, and then much stronger in data analysis. So when you think about the different strands with math, what Ginger would tell you is to focus on those top 2 strands, numerical representations and computations and algebraic relationships for your kids who are struggling in math. Even if their lowest strand happens to be geometry or data, a student is not struggling in math because of geometry or data. A student is struggling in math because they are missing the foundational pieces that are in numerical representation and computations. So for a student who's having difficulty in math, all other things being equal, you want to focus that intervention, that support in those top 2 strands. Those are what's going to give you the most bang for your buck. Hopefully, administrators, you may be hearing teachers using information about MAP to group students. Maybe they grouped them at the beginning of year, but they can still use that information now to consider, do those groups need to change? Maybe some of these students have moved up RIT ranges. Maybe we're really not in the 211 to 220 range anymore. We've mastered this content. We're ready to move up with a different group of kids, whereas maybe not all of these students have moved up. So even though we're not administering MAP again until winter, we can still readjust those groups based on what our formative assessments have told us about where that student is in terms of mastery of those standards right now. Knowing where that student was at the beginning of the year, we can click anywhere in that cell where the student name is in order to find out what are the learning statements for MAP that they are ready to learn, and what are the grade level TEKS that correspond to that. From here, it's really a conversation for the collaborative team. drawing from your PLC, from those common assessments, thinking about what does it mean in your grade level for a student to demonstrate mastery of these standards. As you're hitting some of these standards in small group instruction and intervention, how are you going to know when that student has mastered that standard so that we're ready to move on? It's important when you're looking at this to view that through the lens of what are the essential standards and really focusing in on those essential standards as you're looking at this piece as well. Now, if we think about moving students from one RIT range to the next, for example, moving from a 191 to 200 to a 201 to 210, thinking about the overlap between those different RIT ranges and what it takes to move a student from one 10-point RIT band to the next. Thinking about what kind of work it may take. Let's say a student needs to move up 20 points, that they're significantly behind and they need to move up 20 points, 2 RIT ranges. Looking at what's different from one RIT range to the next helps us to see the scope of that work. This would fit with conversations about the curriculum during planning protocols. Again, regrouping students based on where they are right now. If you've worked at the beginning of the year with a student in 191 to 200 and they've shown significant mastery of this particular standard, you don't need to wait until you retest MAP in the winter. I can already go up to the next RIT range and I can just go up to 201 to 210 to figure out where do I need to go next instructionally for this student. This helps us to make MAP more dynamic, that we don't just refer to it 3 times a year, that we can keep coming back to it and seeing what information this can tell us about where to go next with instruction. Now, as far as printing, lots of teachers do ask about printing with Class by RIT. You have several different options. Up here in the top right, you have the green icon, which will export the entire thing to Excel. That's nice because then you can do some color coding, some highlighting. You can adjust the width of the columns, look at it however you need to. The red icon will export it to a PDF, so it'll just look like it does on the screen, but it's exported to PDF. The purple icon's a little bit different. If I go back a screen or two, you'll see that in order to print with the purple icon, you're going to click this checkbox right here in the front of the strand name, and then you're going to choose which RIT ranges you want to print. That version will show the student names at the top, as well as this piece, as far as what they're ready to learn next. So some teachers prefer that way of printing with the purple icon, because that way they can see student names and what they're ready to learn all in one place. For those groups that are planning tutoring or intervention for a group of kids, that may be a really helpful way for you to print that out and be able to have a plan of what those students need. Okay. All right, any questions about that, about the Class by RIT part? So really at this point in the year, the only new data we really have, I would say, is COGAT. We're going back and reviewing that district assessment piece again, looking at those reports and seeing what value we can get from that, reevaluating where students are so we can look at that MAP Class by RIT and see where adjustments need to be made there. And then reading records, same thing, looking at where they are right now with their reading records, seeing if we need to do some regrouping for guided reading, if we need to move some students around, try a different leveled book with a particular student so we can see if we can push them up to that next level. So these are conversations that hopefully you are hearing in your collaborative teams, that even though this isn't a big data season halfway through the semester, they still have data sources that they need to be having conversations about to make sure we're being as efficient and effective in instruction as possible. Are there any other questions you all have for me about any topics that you wanted to discuss today? All right, I have put in the chat the attendance form for today's session. I've got my email up here, by the way, as well. If you all have any questions, or as you all are working on this with your team, if you need some help with that, if there's a particular report that you would like us to talk with your teams about, we're happy to do that as well. If you have any teachers that are having difficulty with the district assessments, let us know too. Usually it's just one or two little things that we can fix pretty quickly, and then everything is good. We don't want people to get frustrated about things that we can help them fix. So let us know how we can help you. And I appreciate you all attending our meeting today. So thank you all very much.